welcome back to Odd Socks. So it is absolutely freezing this morning and it is still quite early, but I am determined to complete one of the projects, and that project is our new polytunnel. Now, we started this quite a while ago, but with the way the weather's been and financial restrictions, we've only just managed to get the actual polytunnel cover. Monday this week was the only day that we actually had no wind for us to be able to manage the polytunnel cover. Now, because it was just two of us, we needed to have no wind because it's really quite difficult to manage. It's quite a large polytunnel. It's not a large commercial size polytunnel, but it is still large for two people to manage, especially since one of those people is very short, which is me. We've managed to get it on, and now we just have to tidy up both ends around the door and around the back window at the back. Now, I really was hoping to be able to get this a little bit tighter than what it actually is. It's a little bit loose, but unfortunately I can't actually grasp or hold anything at the moment, which makes it very, very difficult to secure the plastic as you're going along, trying to pull it as tight as possible. Now, it was pulled quite tight, but it has been a little bit warmer in the day, so the plastic on the polytunnels will actually stretch out a little bit as it warms up. So what we will do in a few months' time, when the summer hits and it's probably stretched to the most amount it's going to do, we'll actually put some extra battens on and tighten it as we go down, so we don't end up with too much of a baggy polytunnel, because baggy polytunnels will catch the wind, and that's where you get more chance of it actually tearing through the winter months when we have those storms. But let's take a look at the polytunnel so far. So you can see behind me, this is the side view. Now, this polytunnel, I think it was 10 foot by 20 foot, and it will give me more than enough space to grow my extra warmth loving veg that I want to grow. The other polytunnel that we have, which is slightly smaller in the length, that is where our tomatoes are going. This tunnel is for our chillies, our melons, and anything else that I want to grow through either the summer months or throughout the winter. Now, this is using the pallet design, and as you can see, it's a little bit loose in places. Now, we were hoping to pull this tighter on the ends, but it really wasn't playing ball with us, so it's not ideal. But what I'm thinking is, as it stretches through the warmer months, I can pull it down and then maybe tighten it up on this batten here, and then the lower bit on an extra batten at below, so that should hopefully tighten it up, because like I said, a baggy cover will just tear and it's more prone to damage through the winter months. As you can see here, this is our front. Now, the door's been a bit problematic because of how we hung it, which I'll show you in a minute what we're going to be able to do. But now we have all this excess that will need to be folded as tidily as possible and then pinned down, and then all this excess can be cut off. Now, this needs to be repeated obviously on both sides and then at the other end too. Now, this is the part that I absolutely hate doing. It can be really fiddly, and depending on how much patience I'm going to have today will dictate how tidy this polytunnel end actually becomes. But hopefully I can get as least amount of folds as possible, giving it a nice frontage to it. But the thing is, I'm not too worried about excess here because the sun, this is north facing, so the sun's not really going to hit it from this direction. Maybe in the summer months when the sun rises a little bit earlier and higher, it may get a little bit of sun from the front, but in general I'm not concerned. Now, when it comes to the door, obviously I'll explain that in a minute, but we'll get on and start folding and battening this to get this polytunnel finished. So I've come back the very next morning. It's still really early, it's about 7:30 in the morning. All the footage that I did yesterday I actually unfortunately lost, so I've come back to try and get it done again. So this is the finished polytunnel. Now, it's not the best folds in the world, and it's not even the prettiest polytunnel in the world, but it will work wonders. Now, the only issue that we do have at the moment is our doors. Now, our doors, as you can see, they're bifold doors, and they come back, and I can actually chain this one up and actually have this one open long term for ventilation if I so want. And then obviously I've got the bottom door to get into. Now, originally how we hung this, they did swing all the way back, but we've had to put battens on there to support the plastic as we've been going around, so it's nice and secured to the actual frame. This is just the way we like to do it. It's easier for us, especially when it comes to this particular build, and we didn't want to dig all the polytunnel membrane into the ground, which is another really good way of doing it. Didn't want to move these slabs. I didn't want to dig up all the heavy clay at the back. It was just easier for us to do this way than to dig it into that ground. So because of that, we've now reduced how much we can open this door. And if we batten the front of these for the plastic cover to adhere to a lot better, it would mean there'd be even less of an opening, in fact to about here, because the wood would be interfered with this batten here. So that was a little oversight on us when we actually hung the door. Now, we could flip the hinges round so they come out on the outside, but we've got different levels here and there, and by the time it's done, I think it will end up being completely different sizes and different lengths. So at the moment, this is how it's going to be. Now, the door we have just stapled on the plastic. Now, I wouldn't recommend stapling the plastic onto wood and things like that at any pressure points, because it will tear over time. Now, we haven't used staples on the actual main build because that would just be daft. But for this, that's something that's easy to replace if we need to, and we have got spare. I'm happy to do this for now until we can come up with a slightly different design on the door, if we ever do. But I'm quite happy with it so far. Now, that's enough of a width with the door for me to be able to get a wheelbarrow through. So that is ideal. But let me show you inside the polytunnel. So this is the inside of our polytunnel, and it's large enough for everything that we actually want to do. I'm really pleased with how it's actually turned out, especially on the inside. Now, these covers are a little bit baggy if I can reach, but as we go along and the sun starts warming the plastic, it actually starts to naturally stretch anyway. So what we will do as time goes on, we'll actually pull any excess downwards on one side at least, and then re-batten to tighten it up. The thing is about when you're doing your plastics, you really do need it at a warm temperature. It really is best to leave your polytunnel cover a little while somewhere warm, so it's already at that kind of semi-stretched stage. Well, it will pull tighter anyway. So that's one of the jobs for the future. But for now, it's actually not too bad. Now, like I said, it's definitely not drum tight, but it should be okay. Now, you can see from the beds, you may have seen in previous videos, I have got a very large pathway here, and it's probably about 4 foot across, give or take. Now, the reason I've done that is because we'd actually run out of compost. All this is our homemade compost from what we started last year. Now, for this year, I did not want to buy in any compost for any of our beds. So on this side, I actually had to stop here. But for this year, this is perfect because I have an awful lot of chillies that are going to stay in pots. So I've got plenty of area all the way down here and all the way down the one side of this path, be it in the middle or down the sides, depending on how big they're actually going to be, for my excess chilli plants. Now, I've also got an awful lot of chillies to go into this ground. All my chillies will be going on this side. Now, these beds are about, I would say, probably about 4 foot across as well, between 3.5, 4 foot, give or take. Now, next year, whether I extend them by an extra foot on each side and just have a 2 foot walkway will all depend on how my season goes this year. Little couple of jobs I've left to do, which I've got to, you can probably see the black lining here on the inside. This was just wrapped around the bottom of the pallets to protect the wood a little bit. Because we're on a slope here, the water does run down here, downhill, and in fact this area here is a little bit stodgy. But having that plastic wrapped around the base of the pallet will actually protect it a little bit from rotting, hopefully giving us a little bit longer before it actually rots away. Now, this build is pretty much all recycled material. From the pallets to majority of the battens. We did have to buy some of these battens in, but they're not that expensive. The bits of foam, the bits of protection, and even a lot of the screws were all old screws that we already had or actually reused from other projects. Now, we haven't staked this polytunnel at all like we have done on our previous polytunnel. We actually put some poles into the ground and then screwed them into the wood to make sure that it was not going to move whatsoever. In the future we may do that, but I think this is going to be heavy enough not to be moved too much by any wind. If we have wind strong enough to move this polytunnel, then I know that nothing else on this allotment's probably going to survive either. One of the good things that we've got with the polytunnel is the window. Now, with polytunnels, you really do need plenty of ventilation. And I have a window that I can actually open up fully, and it swings almost vertically to allow that through breeze through. And with that top door open, that should be enough ventilation through the hotter months when it could get far too hot in here for a majority of these plants. Now, my plan for this year is chillies all down this one side with pots, because I have a variety of different chillies. And I've actually done a video on my chillies, so if you were interested in what chilli varieties I have, you can go back and watch those. And at the moment, they're all extremely big chillies, so they do need to come down here as soon as possible, but it's really not that warm enough at the moment. It's the nighttime temperatures that's going to be an issue. Once they can get reliably above 8, 9, 10 preferably, they can come down into the ground. But on this side, I'm actually going to grow a few varieties of melons, a few gherkins, and some other little bits and pieces. Now, I did want to grow my Cape gooseberry seeds, but I cannot get them to germinate. I don't know what it is. I cannot get this year my Cape gooseberries to germinate. So I'm going to rethink something through and come up with something else to come into this area. When I plant these chillies into here, the majority of them are going to go into the ground. So if I do use the string method, I will put some hooks up in the batten and I'll run some strings down and then put the excess string underneath the root bowl. That will give it a bit of a climbing opportunity if it needs to, but in general you don't really need to do that with chillies. Last year we did with some of our cayennes, because some of our cayennes were very, very tall last year. And as they grew, we just wrapped the cord around those chilli plants just to give it a little bit more stability. But what do you guys think? Now, for a recycled build, it cost us around about, I'm going to say about £200. It was £150 for the actual plastic. So this polytunnel's 20 by 10 feet. So enough of the plastic to cover that. Now, this is from First Tunnels. And to be honest, I wouldn't buy from anybody else. Now, you could buy really, really cheaply when it comes to polycover plastic, but it really won't last you that long. It really is an investment. Now, if this is looked after, and if we could have got it drum tight, and there was no damage by exterior forces like foxes or wind damage where something's been blown into it. This could last up to 10, 15 years. But you have to make sure that you're fitting it properly and there's no sharp edges, which you will and could get on a recycled polytunnel build. But we found that this plastic is fantastic. It's a lovely thick quality plastic. It really does spread the light beautifully in here. And because it's still very early in the morning, the sun's not that high, but you still get an awful lot of good light here. Now you may see some shady spots. We've got a few trees in the background that block some of the light from particular areas of the polytunnel at this time of day. But in general, it's absolutely fine. So, what do you guys think? Is it a good job? I know we could definitely have done a little bit better on some of the things, but will it work for us to grow lots of things in here through the summer months and the winter months? Yeah, it really will. It really will do the job. I can't see it suffering too much from collapse or being damaged too much in the wind. Obviously, sometimes the plastic can get damaged in the wind by flying objects. But I'm really hoping that this is going to be a success this year. And yes, that's the famous last words, isn't it? As time goes on, it will improve with the soil structure, and hopefully this ground is going to be perfect for all those fantastic summer crops that we can grow this year.